My previous work on women in triathlon history has focused on recognising the agency and voices of women and the ways in which their subjective accounts reveal their efforts to shape triathlon and to reframe understandings of the sport. Yet, as McDonald and Birrell argue, to read sport critically, it is necessary to consider the intersection of multiple axes of power, suggesting that this is best done by examining the discursive meanings surrounding a particular incident or celebrity. To provide a different perspective on triathlon's continued struggle to achieve gender equality, despite consistent advocacy of and commitment to the principle, I want to adapt McDonald and Birrell's idea. I want to consider the ways in which neoliberal philosophies intersect with feminist sport for development and amateur sport discourses during a pivotal phase in the evolution of triathlon from a fringe extreme athletic activity involving mostly men with some sporting background in a small number of developed nations into a lifestyle sport involving novices, women, and an increasingly wider range of age groups across a larger number of nation states. Initially, I hope to present three case studies today, but I can't really do justice to each study in this short presentation. Today, I will focus instead on traces of neoliberalism in the actions and perspectives of Australian triathlon administrators, journalists, race directors, entrepreneurs, and athletes as the structures of the sport took shape in the 1980s. Using oral histories and archival sources, I want to show how neoliberal drivers contributed to the bifurcation of Australian triathlon into age group and professional arms. I acknowledge that the narrative I present is selective, but my purpose is to demonstrate the intersection of neoliberal dynamics with gender in triathlon structures in this case study, and to flag the strong potential for similar processes in international triathlon, particularly in relation to efforts to encourage women and participation in developing countries. From the early 1970s, free trade, supply-driven, competitive market approaches gradually replaced post-World War II social welfare-oriented and demand-driven philosophies as the dominant influence on economic, cultural, and political organisation in Western democracies. Entrepreneurial neoliberal ideals imprint market-like mechanisms on everyday life by placing emphasis on citizen consumers exercising free but responsibilized choice in a variety of private, corporate, and quasi-public practices. Sport has a recognized role in driving neoliberalism as the promoters of high-profile events act as entrepreneurial citizens, normalize aspirational sentiments through high-profile sports spectacles aimed at maximizing exposure and participation, and celebrate athletes who exemplify competitive individualism. Neoliberalism permeates contemporary amateur sports as well. While the moral foundations of amateur sport and its perceived capacity to produce worthy citizens was founded on the rejection of fiscal interests, in the context of late capitalism, many amateur sporting volunteers adopted competitive and entrepreneurial activities in order to sustain or advance their organisational sport. Many studies recognise a range of obstacles to neoliberal opportunity. Neoliberal feminism might call gender inequality out, but critics note that feminist responses are framed in terms of individual entrepreneurialism. Dominant ideas about female empowerment through sport emphasize individual rather than collective solutions to wider gender injustices. Critics are also wary about sport for development and peace initiatives that use sport ostensibly to enable women and girls to develop the necessary economic skills and cultural competencies to overcome poverty, gender stereotypes, and adverse health conditions. Efforts in Barbados, for example, to involve girls in cricket and football simply affirmed existing masculinized, heteronormative, neoliberal sport models, thus limiting the extent to which fundamental and transformative progress towards gender equality was actually achieved. The brief outline of the foundations of age group triathlon in Australia that follows reveals the centrality of the neoliberal ethos to the problem solving and innovation that occurred in triathlon in Australia in the 1980s, as well as the tendency for triathlon promoters to focus on populist and spectacular elements rather than addressing the specific obstacles to participation faced by different groups of triathletes. Australia's earliest triathlons seemed to reflect amateur ideals that combined individual striving and community service. The Shutinno Marathon team organised the first open continuous swim, cycle and run event held in Australia, in Adelaide, South Australia in March 1981, as well as the first Queensland Triathlon in January 1982. Surf Lifesavers organised and participated in the first open triathlon in the state of New South Wales in October 1981, while a real estate agent organised the first Hastings Triathlon in Victoria in April 1982 on behalf of a community service organisation, the Western Port Lions Club. Yet from the beginning, community-oriented triathlon initiatives also relied directly or indirectly on commercial interests. The first Sutherland Shire Tri-Marathon was organised by the Allura Surf Club, but it was Surf Club member and Sutherland Shire Mayor, Alan Andrews, who proposed the event, and another Surf Club member who owned a business called Johnson Wax, who immediately offered to sponsor the event. James Patton organised the first Hastings Triathlon in Victoria on behalf of the Lions Club in April 1982, but all communications and in-person contact prior to the event went through his real estate office. And Nautilus Gym staged the first proper triathlon in Victoria as well. Olympian Dave Power proposed the first Noosa Triathlon in 1983, but was open about his aim to put heads on beds. Local businessmen organised the first Gunnedah Triathlon in January 1983 with obvious hopes of encouraging greater local usage of the town's sports shop and swimming pool. The amateur community service ethic was strong enough for many early triathlon enthusiasts to be wary, however, about Australia's first triathlon entrepreneur, Victorian cycle shop owner Raymond Russell. In 1983, Russell developed a relationship with a local Nissan dealer, wanting to sponsor sporting teams and events. Over the summer of 1983-84, he ran a multi-state triathlon series under the business name Raymond Sports Promotions, RSP, with a final event that was touted as Australia's first national triathlon championships. Anecdotal evidence shows that RSP triathlons were about much more than individual athletic striving. They displayed many features of a neoliberal sports spectacle with unmistakable branding, extensive publicity, race packs including t-shirts and other items for participants, attractive and scantily clad young women at the finish line, enticements for high-profile American and Canadian athletes to compete, and oversized trophies and Nissan Pulsar prizes for the winners of both the race series and the purported national championships. Yet, as RSP sponsorship funds were more often devoted to branding and publicity rather than ratifying and enforcing a clear set of race rules and providing advertised prizes, concerns within the triathlon community began to grow. So much to the extent that in 1984, they began to incorporate triathlon clubs and establish the foundations of state triathlon governing bodies. When Russell failed to provide prize money for the 1986 championships, representatives of the state triathlon associations established a new national governing body, Triathlon Federation Australia. The new state and governing bodies, however, were fairly weak and flimsy and new in their foundations and didn't necessarily immediately establish a new sense of order. Raymond Russell disappeared from the scene, but other triathlon enthusiasts more cautiously responded in small entrepreneurial steps to the grassroots expectations that had been fostered by RSP for professional and spectacular triathlon experiences. Two triathletes, Ken Murray and Greg Brown, believed that triathlon should be pitched to everyday people who wanted to do a triathlon. By staging shorter triathlons, they reasoned it might be possible to tap into the fun run market. As triathlon sports promotions, they organised one event, then two, then three. In 1986, emulating Russell's innovations, they staged a winter triathlon series that offered 3 distances, including what became known as a sprint distance triathlon. Nearly 500 hardy individuals participated despite the freezing winter weather. TSP ran a series of sprint triathlons over the summer of 1987-88, with massive increases in numbers, and rebranded the successful series the following summer as the Commonwealth Bank Triathlon Series. Like RSP events, memories of the Commonwealth Bank series often focus on aspects that appeal to triathlons as consumers, such as the signature mesh race singlets that they got in their race packs. Other race organisers, including Victorian David Hanson, founder of Super Sprint Promotions, and Queensland couple Barry and Julie Voverden, who established Multi-Sport Masochists, followed similar pathways in their efforts to attract more everyday athletes to the sport, more publicity and more sponsors. Implicit in this commercial reinvention of triathlon was the linked reinvention of triathletes as specialised markets. At the same time that TSP and other race organisers began to experiment with sprint distance triathlons, they also attempted to target separate demographics such as novices, women, juniors and professionals. Some claim that Australia's first all-novice triathlon was organised by AFL player and fitness trainer Damien Bray at Narrabeen on Sydney's northern beaches in 1986. The Vovadens also staged a Catch the Fever novice triathlon series on the Gold Coast over the summer of 1986-87, while other novice events took place in Victoria and Western Australia during the same season. Triathlon Sports magazine confidently predicted that novice triathlons would be one of the sport's biggest growth areas. Race promoters also attempted to appeal directly to women during the same period, but with less success. Despite a flurry of women-only triathlons during the same period, a vigorous debate in niche triathlon publications in 1987 and 88 about the continued low rates of female participation revealed the extent and complexity of obstacles to female participation. Race promoters were unwilling to offer equal prize money for professional men and women to equal depth, due to the small proportion of women in any triathlon field. They also offered no solutions to the concerns of non-competitive women, such as the practical realities of juggling domestic duties and personal recreation, and a lack of personal confidence, largely due to external and internal cultural attitudes towards women in sport. Race promoters like TSP thus gravitated to sprint triathlons with large fields and spectacular popular store lifestyle elements in the late 1980s as a participatory catch-all for markets with specialist concerns, and recognised them instead through more nuanced amateur, age and gender categories within those large events. The consolidation of diverse demographics of amateur triathletes into large categorised age group fields was also reliant on clearer demarcation of another professional class of triathletes. The introduction of a professional class served another purpose. For triathlons to succeed as spectacles, they needed athletic celebrities. TSP made possibly the first direct distinction between professionals and amateurs in the 1986 Eon FM Australian Pro-Am short course titles. Race Materials explicitly referred to the age group categories as amateur and stipulated that professionals who won cash could not also take home age group non-cash prizes. One New South Wales participant, Tony Southwell, took a gamble, entered as a pro, came seventh and won $200 as a result. But clearly the distinction still wasn't very clear at that point in time. Promoters and the triathlon media actively sought large sponsorships on the basis that it was the prize money events which would attract the best competitors at their best. With that in mind, triathlon sports publisher Alan Mitchell also launched the Triathlon Sports National Grand Prix in 1987, which included 5 pre-existing safe, professionally organised events with generous prize money purses, and attempted to create focus and publicity around the whole series with a point score and an end of season triathlon ball where awards were given out as well. The promotional strategy seemed to work, and the following year, the Grand Prix was renamed as the Ampol Australian Triathlon Series with a total prize purse of $85,000 for the season. Numerous variations of this model followed over the next decade. However, while race promoters and the media might have used cash to carve out distinctions between professionals and age group athletes, it was an artificial distinction. Insufficient prize money was on offer across Australia to sustain a tier of genuinely professional athletes. In reality, they fell somewhere on a continuum from high-achieving, time-poor but reasonably financed weekend warriors to time-rich, cash-poor full-time athletes. The most typical scenario was somewhere in between. And many of those for a period might have relied on their partners or friends or parents to sustain them while they tried to achieve their best in the professional sphere, but largely could not sustain that for a long period of time. By 1990, triathlons in Australia may have acknowledged diversity in terms of age, gender and financial resources, but not race. But they were mostly one-size-fits-all productions, a combination of commercial innovation, grassroots initiative, and eventually administrative action worked to categorise athletes in terms of gender, age, distance specialisations, and levels of experience and achievement. But with their focus on maximising professional prize pools and financial sustainability, neoliberal populism and spectacularity both imposed artificial wedges between athletes and gave up on the specialist interests as of the age group athletes and even the professional athletes, because they represented economic obstacles to commercial success. In an extended study of these tendencies, I would also examine the involvement of affluent age group triathletes, especially masters women athletes, in International Triathlon Union World Championships, and propose that they contributed as much to Olympic recognition as elite athletes because they helped to bring further legitimacy and credibility to such events. Likewise, athletes, especially women from developing countries, were targeted because triathlon needed to demonstrate global reach before it could secure Olympic recognition. Inclusivity added to the positive story that promoters could sell about triathlon on the national and the international level. But in each case, hopefully I have shown, the specific needs of ostensibly included groups were obscured rather than addressed.